Well, let's turn now to Washington. Lawmakers set to return to Washington next week for a lame duck session of Congress. At the top of the agenda, well, the Bush tax cut. They're set to expire at the end of the year. Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook is standing by with one lawmaker pitching a new compromise. Peter, compromise, that's a word we haven't talked about in a little while.
That's right. We haven't seen a lot of that here in Washington the last little bit. And Lisa, of course, the president, he wants to extend only the Bush tax cuts for the middle class. Republicans say extend for everyone, including high-end earners. And the compromise on the table is a temporary extension for everyone. But Virginia Senator Mark Warner says there's another choice out there. He joins me now from Norfolk to talk with us more about this idea. Senator Warner, good to see you as always. Appreciate it. And you suggest that business needs to be part of this conversation. Walk us through your idea.
Well, here's the basic premise, Peter. I think both sides have agreed 98% of Americans ought to get a tax cut. The question then becomes, what do we do with the top 2%? You know, we ought to acknowledge that both sides have got an argument. The Democrats are right that a permanent extension of the top 2% would cost $700 billion, adding to the deficit. The Republicans are right in that if you take that money out of the economy right now, short term, you could perhaps stall the recovery. And the compromise that's currently sitting on the table, which says let's just do a 2-year extension for the top end, really has some, I think, has some problems. One is, you know, I'm new to the Senate, but one of the things I've learned is if Congress can punt on an issue, they always do. And the idea that we would simply punt and revisit this issue in a major way with deficit reduction in the middle of a national election would mean we'd probably just make this permanent. And secondly, the Congressional Budget Office says that, you know, if you're going to do a tax cut and you want to try to jumpstart the economy, maybe this to the top wealth earners may not be the most effective way. So my approach is this. It recognizes that one bright spot in our economy is that large companies and smaller companies, particularly large companies, are doing very well in America right now. $2 trillion in cash sitting on their balance sheet. So our goal in this ought to be, how do we get that money off the sidelines, reinvested? Because government has used its tools in terms of government stimulus and in terms of monetary policy. So my goal is to say,
so you want to use this money to incentivize them to...
I want to take the $65 billion that would be given to the top 2% for the next 2 years and instead use dollar for dollar that for targeted business tax cuts that would get that money off the sidelines and into creating jobs and jumpstarting the economy.
Senator, any sense from the Democratic leadership in the Senate or the White House that they would consider this kind of idea as an alternative?
Well, listen, Peter, this has got a little in it that everybody can either like or dislike, and I'm open to amendment or change. I'm open for business. But I think the ability for the Democrats, for example, to reach out to business and say, hey, we don't have all the answers. You help us figure out what those tax cuts ought to look like. Investment tax credit, R&D tax credit, write-offs, you know, payroll tax holiday would be great long term. I also think it recognizes for the Republican standpoint that, you know, we shouldn't take the money out of the economy. My hope is that both sides would say this might be a starting point for further conversation.
Senator, if your plan does not become the option on the table, are you prepared to back a permanent extension for 2 years? Because it seems like that's where everyone's headed.
Well, it seems like that's where everybody's headed. And I'm not going to, if I'm asking folks to take a look at my idea, I'm not going to say I would rule out anybody else's idea. The problem I feel with the 2-year extension is, you know, temporary extensions end up becoming permanent, and we look at the problems we've got, the AMT right now, or the so-called doc fix, because you did something temporary and it became permanent. And I think we've got to recognize CBO has said this may not be the most effective way to jumpstart jobs.
Senator Warner, we got to leave our discussion there. We'll see you back here in Washington, and Lisa, we'll send it back to you in New York.
All right, Peter Cook, thank you very much, Chief Washington correspondent, talking a compromise on the expiration of Bush tax cuts.